Let's do a little skip counting review. Before we start talking about skip counting, let's talk a little bit about what we have learned, what we know about using a number grid. We don't always want you to need a number grid to work on skip counting. However, this is a great start in understanding how numbers work and how skipping numbers can just really become a pattern. So we know on number grids that each row the numbers are counting by ones. There's really no skipping. That's just counting by ones. However, when you go down one row, you begin adding 10 each time. The number is increasing by 10. This is how you skip by tens. Everything in this column ends with a 3. So it's helpful to know that when you're skipping by tens. If you're skipping by tens, the ones place is going to always end with the same digit. Similarly, if you skip by twos, you're really counting every other box. You're looking at a number and then you take 2 steps and then you say the second number. Take 2 more steps. That's skipping by twos, taking 2 steps forward on the number grid. That does not have to start with even numbers, however. I could always begin on the 31 and take 2 steps and count by twos this way. So you could start with evens or odds. The numbers could be even numbers or odd numbers in skip counting by twos. Oftentimes in skip counting by fives, you'll notice patterns like we are familiar with, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on. If you look at the last 2 digits of a number and you're trying to skip count, if you recognize that pattern, then it will help you identify that you're counting by fives. It gets a little trickier when we start to skip count and we begin with a larger number. As you can see, this number grid does not go up to 137. So we need to figure out how can this grid help us if we don't see 137 on this grid. We need to skip count by twos. What we can do is, instead of looking at or trying to find 137, just find 37 on the number grid. Kind of pretend or imagine that that is a 137 and count by twos from there. So take 2 steps and the next number is 39, but of course we have to write 139. If you take 2 more steps, you would reach 40 and then 41 or 141, because we are not forgetting that we are in the 100s here. We can do the same thing when we're trying to count by fives, but starting with a larger number like 255. Since I don't have that starting number on my number grid, I'm just going to look for 55 on my number grid. There it is. And then I will just replace that empty spot in the beginning with a 2, 255. Don't forget, now we're counting by fives. So I need to take 5 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the next number would be 60, but I'm not going to forget to call that 260. And now I'm starting to notice something that might be a pattern. I see 55, 60, 65, 70. But I'm also going to remember that we are in the 200s. So I'm going to not forget to write that 2 in the hundreds place. If you are skip counting by tens, then you should look at the ending digit. Here we have 142, and since this number grid doesn't go that high, once again I'm going to look for that 42. But since we've already identified that when we skip count by tens, the ones place digit will constantly be the same, and we know this shortcut of just moving down one row to skip ahead by 10, then we should make sure that when we're writing our new numbers, 52, 62, but aha, don't forget that 100, we should notice then that all of our ones place digits are the same. In this case, they're all twos, all the way down. Now, would you please get a number grid to have handy at your desk so that you can follow along and do some practice questions with me? Press pause so that you can have time to go get that number grid. In second grade, when we ask you to work on skip counting, the directions say to finish the pattern, but we don't tell you what the skip counting pattern is. That's the most important thing that you need to find out. You need to do that by start off looking at the numbers that are provided for you, the numbers that are done. You need to identify how many steps in between these two numbers. Well, once again, it might be helpful if you just look at those last two digits, the tens and the ones. Forget about that hundreds place for now. I see 23 and then 25. If you take a look at a number grid, you would see that 2 steps away from 23 is 25. So this is a counting by twos pattern. So once again, I could ignore that 100 and I would see that 27 comes next. But of course I'm going to write that 100 in. And then after 127 would come 129 and then 131. Not too tough after you identify what skipping pattern we're following. But when you move on to the next set of numbers in the next skipping pattern, the skipping pattern is not the same. Please don't just assume that we're skipping by twos down here, because we're not. If you look at the tens and the ones down here, we have a 45, a 50. To me, that looks and sounds like I'm starting a counting by fives pattern. 45, 50, 55, 60, and so on. But let's not forget that we do need to write down this 2 in our 100s place. So 255 would come next, 260, 265, and so on. Here we have the last two types of skip counting patterns that we ask you to learn in second grade. And up here I have some pretty large numbers, 573 and 583. Once again, if I concentrate on those tens and ones, you might notice something already. We have the same ones place digit. They both end with threes. That's one of my clues that tells me I'm probably counting by tens. 73, 83, what would come next? If I was counting by tens, sure enough, it would be a 93. I'm not going to forget that 5 in the hundreds place though. 573, 583, 593, 10 more than that. If I look at my number grid and I look at where the 93 is and I look one row down, you'll see that it ends in 03. But I have to be careful here. I can't just put a 5 in this place, because notice, I went from the 500s, way up high in the 500s, back down to a very low 500 number. So when I get up to 593, I'm very, very close to a 600 number. So therefore, I'm really not going to write 593. I need to change my hundreds place to a 6, because we've now crossed over the 600 spot on a number grid. And last This skip counting pattern here looks interesting because if we concentrate on those last two digits, the tens and the ones, they're the same. So they are not changing at all. However, what we do have changing is that hundredths place. That means that we are increasing by 100 every time. So we were at 331, now 431. If we increase by another 100, only that hundreds place increases. Everything else remains the same. Counting by 100s may be the easiest one of all. Thank you for taking the time to review skip counting. If you have any further questions, don't be afraid to ask.